Welcome, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see you at our Energize Your Classroom webinar series. People are joining, and we're so delighted that you're able to join us. Hello, write to us on the chat with a short hello and where you're joining from. It's always great to be able to hear from our teaching community all around the world. I'm Silvia Karastati, I'm Head of Teacher Support for Language Cert, and we're so delighted that you're able to join us today. This is our Energize Your Classroom series, and it's our edition called Energize Your Classroom with a Human Touch. This is our third webinar for this series, and in this four-part webinar series, we have been running this from September, and it's going to go on until December. The first two parts, they're on our website, so if you want, you can go and check them. We talked about the inner voice. We talked about soft skills in the teenage classroom. With these webinars that are especially developed for teachers, we want to be introducing fresh perspectives and useful ideas to help you better support your students throughout the academic year. Now, all our speakers in this series place a special emphasis on the human touch that teachers bring to the classrooms, and also with an emphasis on aspects of human communication. Today, we're going to be thinking about harnessing the power of the visual arts. And with us, we've got a great friend of mine and a great speaker, Nóra, and she's the assistant professor at the Department of English Applied Linguistics at Eötvös University in Budapest in Hungary. And I'm sure I've made a lot of mistakes with the names and the pronunciations, but Nóra will forgive me. And it's such a great pleasure to have you with us today from Budapest, Hungary, to join the Language Cert community. Nóra, harnessing the power of the visual arts. We met a few years back in the Image Conference, and we shared a common passion about bringing art and artwork within language teaching. I'm so excited to have you here on this platform addressing the Language Cert teaching community. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's a pleasure and it's an honor to be here with you today. So I welcome everyone. I guess I can just start my presentation then, yes? So yes, the visual arts, although I'm a linguist and I'm a language teacher, who became then an applied linguist and a researcher, but I'm still a language teacher who really loves working with the arts. And just today I was teaching in the museum. That's where I always take my students. So for me, the arts is like the #1 resource where you turn for empowerment, for passion, for interesting materials. So when Sylvia asked me to do a presentation about it, I was just over the moon. I was really happy to be able to do this for you. So let's just get started. Let me just tell you that it's harnessing the power of visual arts in the adult language classroom. So basically, the materials you will see today and the ideas you will see today will work with adults and young adults the best. But I think that teachers are magicians when it comes to adapting materials and using ideas. I am sure that even if you're teaching in a high school environment, or if you're teaching even lower levels, you will be able to use these ideas for your own classrooms. Unfortunately, I can't meet you and I can't talk to you about your teaching experiences now, but I'm sure that you come from diverse backgrounds, and the arts will work anywhere and everywhere. Now, let's see how and what you can do, and I'm pretty sure you're already doing some brilliant things with the arts. All right, let's move on. So, my very first question, just to get you thinking and while we are still gathering, look at this picture. Well, this is exactly what the weather is like today here in Budapest. It's just much colder. I like using this picture as my #1 go-to picture to get my students think and talk about the arts, because it's quite a nice kind of feeling. This painting has a nice feeling, but at the same time, it can teach them a lot about like how artworks work. But I would never start with that. I would never start with analyzing and only just describing the picture. Where I always start is like asking the question. This idea comes from the approach called visual thinking strategies. So it's what's going on in this picture, because the moment you ask this question, you ask your students to look for a narrative. And I don't know how you are, but most of my students usually start with just describing what they can see. because they look for evidence. But I like to start with a story to look for something that happened, because then everybody has something to say and they don't feel so intimidated by talking about a work of art. And then my next question would always be like, okay, now how does it make you feel? Does it make you feel, I don't know, nostalgic, maybe a bit sad, a bit cold? Any kind of information or comment is valid here. Of course, then you can go into the analysis, the description of the image, of the setting, of the colors. You can analyze people in the background. You can analyze the technique. You can analyze what people are wearing or where they are looking. The gaze is very important because they are looking out of the image. So that's quite an interesting feature of this painting. But as I said, I will always start with looking at the story, looking for a narrative. When I started using pictures like this, any kind of picture that students could relate to, it's up to you and it's up to your students' interest, and you know what topic you are covering right now in your schools. I noticed that the moment I have a discussion question or a discussion image like this one, even the quietest student will have something to say after a while, because they will have an opinion, they will notice something. So this is just the first little exercise for you to look, just enjoy the painting and think about like, what's really going on here? What do you notice? And how does it make you feel? Because this way you appreciate your students' personal responses first, because maybe we want them to be analysts, but we are not art historians. I don't know, maybe some of you are, but we are not training art historians. We want them to socially and emotionally engage with the painting. Now, let's see what we are really talking about today. Like, I will just summarize for you why it is a good idea to use art, what visual art forms you could work with. I will offer you 4 ways of integrating arts-based activities. I will just sketch out what the multimodal approach towards arts integration is. And then I will give you 4 examples with suggestions for classroom adaptation. Okay, let's get started because we don't have much time. So why art and what art forms? It's very simple and it's very easy. First of all, art will support social emotional engagement and learning. That was the example I used just before. It will help your students connect, probably socially reflect on situations and scenes that they hopefully don't experience, or they experience but they don't know how to talk about, or they will see historical examples, or any kind of social issue might be addressed in a painting, and they can respond to it emotionally, and you can give them the space to respond emotionally. But once you start talking about paintings, and once you start actually expressing your opinions, it's a bit like doing an exam activity, a reading activity. When you ask the student to look for the answer, or tell you something about the text, and then they say something about the text, but then you look for evidence. The moment you start looking for evidence and you start analyzing pictures and supporting your statements about a painting, you will immediately switch on cognitive skills, reasoning skills, and you start being a bit more critical about it because you will be more aware of the images around yourself. So this is how you can actually develop critical and multimodal literacy skills, because by focusing on images instead of using them only as illustrations in course books, we can more critically connect with them. Because we all know it, the students all want the images today, they want the videos today, they want the images today. So to actually talk about the images, how they work, what they represent, how they represent what they represent, what techniques are they using, it's like what colors are expressive, what design elements are expressive. So that will actually make them more conscious and more aware of how pictures and images work around them. And of course, it will entertain them, boost their imagination and creativity, because it can be a good source for a lot of exciting activities to include art. So maybe we think that art can be just a supplement, but actually it can be either a supplement, but this could be the core of a language course. Now, what sort of visual art forms? The 2 images you see here are from my own collection. The one is street art, somewhere in Sydney. It's a painting on a wall. So sometimes it's just enough to look around us and we will see art everywhere. It's a good activity of noticing. And the other one is a picture book, because maybe we only associate the visual arts with paintings and sculptures and everything that's in a museum and like the serious art. But no, art can be in silent books as well. So you can think about paintings, prints, and photographs, sculptures. There's art in the city, in art installations, graffitis everywhere. It's been with us for thousands of years. And there are sculptures everywhere, either contemporary, modern sculptures, then we have the traditional and classical tradition, and those sculptures. Then book art and video art is equally important. And I say video art, even in its traditional sense of video artists who create art for exhibitions, and video art you can see today on TikTok, on YouTube. You can use those pieces as well, because there are really expressive and artistic videos. Book art is close to me because I also research picture books and silent books, and I will tell you about them, how you could probably use them. So let's get going. How to integrate art-based activities. I have 4 ways. So you can have regular arts-based activities. You do something similar to what we did today. So you simply start a lesson with an artwork to engage students in discussions. This artwork can be something related to the seasons, to the events around you, to holidays, to something that you are concerned about or you talk about, or it could be connected to the coursework that you are doing already. But if you have that artwork as an opening, students will probably feel a bit more relaxed, and art, by just looking at it, will make them feel better. I actually had business courses with real businessmen who loved the idea that I integrated artworks. We talked about financial stuff, but then to have that kind of 5-minute relaxation of talking about a painting or a photograph was a real joy. But then you can also use artworks if you teach at university, or you teach, I don't know, in college or in private schools. So artworks can be prompts for writing stories, reviews, argument essays, and interpretations. So you can cover lots of genres through working with artworks. The second one, arts-based projects. So through a term, you can inspire students to engage with artworks and create an art portfolio. This can be something connected to a theme: peace, bullying, hope, love, friendship, and justice. So they can work around it, do their own illustrations, look for images, create a video, write a story which is illustrated. So you always have something to do from month to month or week to week that contributes to the art portfolio, which you can present at the end of the lesson. I usually work with art portfolios with my own classes, and students love the idea that they work on something all through the term, and then they can make it pretty. I always tell them to make it pretty then by the end of the term and create a nice printed version or a PDF version of their own work. But if it's too long, students can just prepare posters. If they are good at videos, they can also prepare a short video with art. Third one, museums and art galleries. So my approach has been for about 10 years is that taking students to the museum or to an art gallery is a better experience than anything I can imagine I can give them. Everybody always shows up when I take them to the museums. If they are sick, then they visit on their own. And it's just a different kind of embodied experience when we are all present. We leave the school and we go on a field trip and we go to the nearest museum. I used to take them to the big ones, to the big fine arts museum and to the big contemporary art museum. But then I realized that it doesn't really matter when I take my students. The thing is that we have the shared experience, because real learning happens through guidance in the context of a shared experience. And what can be better than going to the museum together? Especially if you work ahead with a museum educator, or you visit the museum first, get a couple of ideas what you could do there. You don't need to do the guided tour. If the museum lets you, you can just take your students and ask them to do 2 activities in the museum. Sometimes I do simply like you choose an artwork and you're the guide and you show us that artwork, and we play this kind of guiding each other through the museum. Or sometimes we do translation practice there. Sometimes we do description. We write labels. We write funny labels for artwork. So you can do quite a lot. Sometimes I ask the museum educator to help us with a short introduction or even just giving us an activity. So it's up to you. When you prepare for the visit, you can give students focus points. And then I think it's always a good idea to organize an on-site discussion. My students reported to me that that really helps them engage more when you let them share their honest opinion about the museum experience. So my practice is taking them to the nearest, sometimes to the cheapest museum, or sometimes to a free gallery, and we just enjoy that. And that's it. When we have time, we go further. Now, if you don't have the chance to do that, then we go on site and we engage with the content museums create, and museums and galleries, I think, are always far ahead in communication and in designing course materials and really nice materials. So just engage with their online materials and you will be happy, I think, with the content they have there. And finally, you can have simple artistic activities. Students don't need to be artists to really do this. They can simply do sketches, compositions in museums, in the classroom. Sometimes I use a topic as inspiration. When I take my classes to a museum, then we just talk about the theme of the exhibition. And then I ask my students to design a poster. Or they can create a slideshow presentation inspired by the topic. I am amazed how inspiring these artworks can be and what kind of connections they create in the students' mind, because they start linking these artistic ideas with a story they have read, a film they have seen, a poem they know, a song they like. So they start creating these connections so they can create a digital or non-digital multimodal composition in which they integrate image and text, or if it's a video, they integrate image and text and sound as well. They can create this way a digital story, or they can simply say that this is my artistic idea. This is a story I really love. I will illustrate this story. Of course, you can do more hands-on experiences like creating any kind of artifact or an artwork in school, clay figure, a handmade booklet, seasonal or theme-based. Or you can do an art installation at school. Check with, of course, with the management if you can really do it, but that is a real project and a real experience to have that. Other than that, I think if your students are into social media and Instagram or TikTok, I sometimes encourage my students to create an Instagram carousel style slideshow for Instagram about artworks that they really like. So that's one way of engaging, because there they have to select the images, put the images in a particular order, and then they can add, of course, their emoji, their little icons and so on, select music. So it's totally multimodal, and then write the text in English for it. So this can be their artistic creation. So you see, there are lots of ways to integrate art into your courses. It can be just one lesson, it can be one activity, or you can have a longer project which just goes for the whole semester or the whole year. Or it can be seasonal, related to holidays. So it's up to you to decide how much art you can integrate. I think what's important is that you do that and love it and be inspired by it. So I'm a multimodal researcher, which means that I'm a linguist, but I'm also a multimodal researcher, which means that when I think about any kind of artwork, when I think about any kind of book, I don't only look at only the image or only the text, but I always look at the complexity of the different resources that I used in creating an artwork or a book or a video and so on. So this is the multimodal approach. It's an interdisciplinary approach. I think we are all familiar with it because there has been quite a buzz around it. This is a new trend in language pedagogy and in discourse analysis. But what's important here is that we focus on the social context of communication, and we appreciate that it's always visual, spoken, gestural, written, and spatial, and so on. As teachers, we are the best at it. We do this already because when we teach with our voices, with our gestures, with our faces and our movement. And we also know that the way the classroom is organized is important. And we also know that the resources that we use are really important. So we are totally full of multimodal already. We also understand that all the resources we use have social and emotional meanings, but we also understand that they have individual meanings. For particular students, for everyone, they have different meanings. Now, from the multimodal perspective, we also understand that every text and every artwork is always an interaction between the resources. So when you go to the museum, there's the image, there's the painting, but then there's the label, and there's the temperature of the room, and there's the lights, and there's everything around you. So it creates a really complex multisensory experience. Then in a painting, you work with colors and materials and layout. So it's more complex. It's not just the actual paint on the canvas. There's a lot more. The material nature of the paint or the way it looks also matters. In a book, we work with color, typography, layout, image. There's the written text. So it's really complex. And I always tell my students, like, imagine your favorite story written in Comic Sans and then written in some kind of Times New Roman, really serious looking book. Then they understand how much typography matters. Now, multimodal pedagogies as a new trend in language education has started about 20 years ago, or even more than 20 years ago. But basically, we focus on an engagement with multimodal text, but from a really conscious perspective, really know what we are doing. Everybody is already interacting with multimodal texts, but we really want to be conscious. So we explicitly teach it to students, and we make sure that they understand, they pay attention to it, like, what happens if you change the color here? What happens if you change the text here? What happens if you change the image? How do the filters on this Instagram picture impact your mood? So by paying attention to these tiny details, we start realizing that every text that we work with is really complex. So when we ask students to do this and they have a feeling for it, they might not have the words for it, but giving the words to them will help them with vocabulary development, but will also change the way they look at these things. So we have a lot to do then when we engage with these multimodal texts, and we make them more aware, which will make them more critical. And it's a win-win situation. So encourage engagement in multimodal texts, and we should support creative multimodal compositions such as posters, slideshows, and videos, something language teachers are already doing, but we can really actively do this from time to time. It's not only the text or the written or spoken text that matters, but it's the complexity. So if we do all this, we are really enacting or applying a multimodal approach to language education. And I think we can just make it a little bit more fun. And the real fun happens when you start integrating the images. So let me show you 4 examples now. I will talk about first my love here, the intertextuality and myth. That's what I really love talking about, making connections. Then we will look at pop art and different perspectives. Art in the city. I will show you light installations, but you can use any kind of art in the city. And then storytelling in artistic silent books. I try to give you something from the very traditional through the modern, through the real, what's in the street, and then what's on the bookshelf. So to realize that art is really everywhere. So the first painting is this really famous one, making connections between intertextuality and myths. I always tell my students that you don't need to read about the great myths. Everybody else in Hollywood will do that, and they will create fantastic films. So just to make it sure that they understand that myths and legends are everywhere, And they are in every story, and every fairy tale is reused, and every legend is reused and recycled in a way. There's nothing really new under the sun, right? So this painting, we love talking about it. My university students love this painting because this is the Fall of Icarus is the perfect painting. It's a famous painting. It's an easy access painting. It's a really good one to talk about. First of all, there's a story. There's a story in the painting. We don't usually notice Icarus, of course, in the sea, but we only notice what's going on, what these people are doing in the countryside, and there's the sea and the ships and everything, and then they notice Icarus and they realize there's something more going on, and then they realize the moment you read the title, it will totally change your perspective, and it will change the meaning of the painting. And that's wonderful when you realize this image-text relation and how the title really impacts our interpretation of the painting. And then, of course, once you have that link, that myth, then there's something to talk about here. But first, you can explore the painting. You can describe the painting. You can talk about the details, who is looking where, what do you notice, what's in the background, and so on. So there's a lot to talk about. You can think of a narrative. You ask students, you remember the question that recalls a narrative, what's going on. And then you can examine the visual grammar. And the visual grammar here is really important because usually we think that whatever matters is in the center. It will be the most colorful, put in the center, and that's where we focus. But then what's on the margin, what's on the sides is also important. So it makes students more observant. And once they start noticing that, then you realize that, oh, there's a subplot, there's another story going on. What's that other story? And this is when you point out how the title changes the focus. Then you can explore the story. Now, you can read original stories, you can read interpretations, you can read adaptations of the story. There's a lot to explore there. So it's also a lesson on literature. And then you can look at different interpretations. I chose this one from Matisse, but there are a lot more. You will see sculptures, you will see lots and lots of interpretations of the same story. And the illustrations, I really love this one by Matisse because, again, this shows us a different perspective with different colors, and only 4 colors happening here. And here we have someone in the center, and there are the stars around, and there's the blue of the sky. So, and then students can recreate something similar that gives them some kind of artistic creation. Inspiration for that. So how can you adapt this idea? Art projects which connect, and there are some examples. So you select a character from a legend, a myth, or a fairy tale. You search for visual representations of it. There's a story you love. Everybody knows Little Red Riding Hood. I always use Little Red Riding Hood because everybody knows one version of the story. Then my students never agree. But then we look at different illustrations of the same story, and then we realize that it's a story for little children, but it's a story also for adults. And when they see this illustration by Sam Weber, then they realize that, wow, it's a scary story. The size of Little Red is exactly the size of the tongue of the wolf. This is really scary. But then I show them an illustration for children, and they realize, like, how cute this story can be. So it's a beautiful experience to talk about, to look at the same story through different illustrations. And then we realize, like, how the visual, how the art will change the meaning of the original story. And then you can ask your own students to look for contemporary representations in films, in art, in music. Now, here's the New Yorker. Everybody will recognize Venus, and you will recognize artworks, and you will notice that these artworks are everywhere. The Mona Lisa will be there, or the really big famous ones you can go and check first. In advertisements, on book covers, on magazine covers, probably in video games, probably in TikTok videos, everywhere there will be some kind of reference. In memes, you will have references to artworks. My students did a presentation on artistic memes just the other day, and they came up with the idea of Mona Lisa in different memes. So that's, again, why not start with that if students already engage with that? So here the New Yorker has the Venus representations, then you can then go and look for the background story and find other examples. So that's one way of setting up an artistic project. Now, different perspectives and pop art. This is a full lesson for me just to connect with this painting. This one. I really would love to know, just take notes for yourself. I'm sure you are familiar with this painting, but then when I ask my students to tell me like, so what can you see here? Then they always say immediately like, it's a comic book. It's a comic strip because it looks like one. And I say like, how do you know? Like there's the speech bubble and there is the big bang, the big explosion, and it's really active. So yeah, I'm looking for a story first. So what's going on in the picture and so on. So we try talking about it first as if it was really a comic book scene, because they don't usually know Liechtenstein and they don't know pop art and they don't understand where it comes from. But then you start thinking about thinking about the visual grammar, then we look at original DC comics maybe, and then we understand that, okay, the comic was only the inspiration. The comic book panel was only the inspiration for the painting. And then I ask my students what style it is and how large it is. Then they can actually learn something about art history and we can talk about pop art. And then I zoom in. I find a good image and I zoom in. And then they realize that it's an oil painting. It's a real painting. And that's really amazing for them to see like how different perspectives can really change the meaning of a painting and how it is represented. And we look at the technique. Actually, there are restoration videos and beautiful videos about how the painting was made and created. But then I zoom out. I zoom in and zoom out. And when you zoom out and you look at like the size, I found that one image, but there are lots of images of this original painting. And then they look at the size and they realize that it is like 2 meters wide. It's big. It's really big. So it's an exaggerated comic book panel. And they love this idea because most students love comic books, although I met some students who don't like comics, but mostly they like comics. And then they love the idea like what they like and the comics and DC and the Marvel work can actually be inspiration for real serious art. So it gives you the opportunity here again to start making connections other than looking at different perspectives, as I said, through the technique. So how do you create a comic and how do you create an oil painting or a painting technique, the size and the proportion, and then putting it in context, like what happens to it once it's not a book, but it's on a wall. And then you can talk about comics and manga and other types of media and ask students if they can imagine that their favorite comics are turned into artworks. So what can you do and how can you adapt this idea about different perspectives? I select a well-known art piece, an artwork, examine its details. Once I have examined these details, I want to find information about its original size, medium, and technique. And I look at it like, what's the location? And what's the environment like? So this kind of zooming in and zooming out really helps me engage with the artwork from different perspectives and learn a lot more about it. And then we always forget, like, some of the artworks are really real, even temporarily, as Banksy's street art, or the most famous pieces. It's stunning to see sometimes like how you imagine a painting, and sometimes it's much larger and smaller. So Google Arts is the best platform for this because it's like, you know, that like, just like Street View, they have museum view. So you can actually walk around in famous museums and look at the original location of some of the most famous paintings. And you can then think about like, has it been repainted and adapted? And I think that this sort of activity really supports the development of critical visual literacy, because we sometimes look at images out of context and without really understanding how they were made. But one activity I really like doing in museums is like walking really close up to the image as far as the museum guide lets you, because they will tell you not to go too close. But if they let you go close and look at like the brush strokes and realize that this is real, somebody's real work, somebody really created this. Look at how thick the paint is. And that will just give them some kind of different connection with the artwork. And then zooming in and realizing like, where do you put it? How is it represented? Will give you a different perspective. All right. Now, art in the city. Excuse me. Art in the city and working with installations is another way to engage with art. As I said, sometimes when I walk around in Italy, I always say, or even here in Budapest, I always say that I don't even need to go to museums. Art is everywhere in the city, in the buildings, in the sculptures, in installations, in things people leave around. Maybe sometimes all you need is just a camera or your phone. And when you frame something that you see in a certain way, it becomes more like an artistic composition. But then let's turn to installation first, and we can talk about other forms of art in the city. So you see this light installation by Martin Creed. It's titled, "Everything is Going to Be All Right." This particular art installation or light installation this one is in Christchurch, New Zealand. This was on, I think, in 2015 and 16, a couple of years after they had a huge earthquake. So then the Christchurch Art Museum, Art Gallery, put this sign up, "Everything is going to be all right." It looks beautiful. It looks really modern and it looks really entertaining and flash, but it's also a message of hope to people around the city to say that, yes, there was a disaster, but we are rebuilding the city and everything is going to be all right. So this will show you, and this is the simplest way to show students like how art in the street can immediately reply and respond to social issues, to disasters, and so on. This is somewhere where we turn, art is something where we turn for hope, for inspiration, and some kind of community is built around this art installation. So it's fun to talk about it. And then you will realize that, I love using this example, that this sign and this artwork, there are lots of work number 975 and so on. So they have created quite a lot of these light installations. And I really love it because sometimes the response we get from artworks is more bizarre or brutal or more honest in a way that it doesn't always show hope, but it shows us reality. I think that this sign is a beautiful example because it shows us reality. It appreciates that there's some issue going on. There's a lot to worry about in the world, but it gives us hope, and it gives us hope in a playful way. It's fun and playful, and it is also hopeful. So it gives you the opportunity to talk about how art and writing in urban places can influence people, can impact how you feel, can inspire you. And we can just ask students how such a message would make them feel. Then you can talk about the context of artworks and think about where and when the artwork is exhibited and how it matters, how it can respond to people's needs and people's feelings and different social situations. So simply you could ask, like, where would you put this sign? In the classroom, in the school, in the city, or in the world? Where would you want to send this message to somebody? So that's one activity that can be adapted in millions of ways. These are my own photos I took walking around different cities. So I would just ask my students to take a camera, walk around your neighborhood or another city when you are traveling, maybe when they go on holiday. And this could be a longer project or holiday activity. If you travel, take pictures of artworks out in the city. You don't need to go into a museum. Just look for art anywhere in the street, graffiti, paintings, wall art, whatever you like. You can notice historical and modern artwork graffiti as well. You can talk about the importance of preserving art in the city, reflect on the idea of light installations and street sculptures, tiny ones and big ones, ask students to share their opinions on graffiti art. Maybe they are against it, maybe they love the idea, maybe they will say that someone truly skilled should do graffiti. And then talk about how these activities raise awareness of our surroundings. And this helps us notice how people react to events and how art in the city is more like a message carrier. Then, if you think in terms of a longer project, the whole group could put together like art in the city, a map of artworks in the city, noticing it, then creating maybe artworks in the world that we like, out of museums. So this is, I think, closer to students, and they might like this idea more than just simply looking at traditional paintings, which can also be fun, of course, but this is just a more playful and more interactive way of working with art. And inspired by my previous Martin Creed light installation, I think it just gives us the possibility to talk about and think about temporary light installations or other artworks around the city. Like, what will you do? What do you think would really represent something for you here and there? Okay. And finally, I have storytelling and artistic silent books. I wonder if you are familiar with silent books, but silent books are wordless picture books. There are picture books for children, but there are picture books for adults as well. Maurice Sendak said that every children's book is also for adults. Of course, every time we read it, they will meet something else to us. So I like working with wordless picture books because this is a double page from a wordless picture book, Or the Lonely People by Maria Mari, who is an award-winning Hungarian illustrator. So this book is for teenagers and for adults. It talks about loneliness, it talks about isolation, not necessarily because of the pandemic. It wasn't created because of the pandemic, but it is more like how we live close to each other, but also separated. And then there's a story in this picture book where a community in a block of flats is really isolated, but there's something happens. Somebody loses their cat, and searching for the cat, they start coming together, and then they actually organize a dinner together. It's a lovely story. It's a heartwarming story. But you see that there are no words in it. So you might say like, okay, but I teach a language class. What should I do with a wordless picture book? Then I say that these are the best resources for language teachers because there's a narrative. There are lots of beautiful images that you can label and talk about. There are emotions expressed. There are social situations. And then you can actually engage with the artistic illustrations and the images, which are inspirational. And at the same time, they give you a lot of ideas for activities, and they work with every level because you create the language for it, but they give you a lot of inspiration, but then you can use them from B1 to B2 to whatever levels that you actually like. And you can use them in many different languages as well. So you can simply ask, like, for example, there is this picture book. Who are these people? What are they doing? Where do they live? How do you think they will meet? How do the images make you feel? And then you start using it for language development. How can you do that? For example, describe the scene, be the narrator. Tell the story from the perspectives of the different characters. Write thought and speech bubbles for the characters. Write a review of the book if you don't want to write the narrative. So the moment you start playing with all the language potential of a silent book, then they become not so silent and they become really loud and they will be filled with language. So these images I took actually from the previous images I took from the illustrator's website, but you can of course get full books to work with in class. So since they are both artworks and narratives, they work perfectly. I think that what you can do well is to choose any book. Some of my favorites are The Wave. It's a story of a little girl who engages with the sea. Blossom is a beautiful story of a boy who finds a magical camera in the sea. The Snowman is a really famous silent book. The Arrival is a more serious one about immigration and social issues. So these will be perfect to practice the narrative tenses and build vocabulary. You can choose simple topics if you don't want to engage students in more difficult topics, or you can choose real graphic novels, silent books written for adults. And you can use it for vocabulary building, grammar practice, writing speech bubbles, stories, book reviews, personal responses. And then, of course, I have a couple of colleagues who got really inspired by these silent books, and they started asking students to create their own little versions of silent books. So that's another solution to do. So since our time is soon up, my closing thoughts here would be that what's most important, apart from my initial suggestions, like how you can work with artworks, like experiment, use artworks to entertain, engage, and inspire your students. And don't just think of visual art as something that belongs only to museums, something that is not to be touched and only to talk about as an art historian. We don't need to be art historians or museum educators to work with artworks. We can, it's ours. We can create the art, and it surrounds us. So I would design activities that support engagement, reflection, and the interaction in any of the ways that I listed above. And I would focus on cultural and social meanings without doing like the real visual grammar analysis always, or without doing all the art historical analysis. Then an important thing is that when we are focusing on artworks, consider all the elements, not only the actual visual elements, and think about the role of the label, the role of the title, the context, where it is exhibited, how the colors work, and so on. And I would show artworks which your students might not know, because we are used to always engaging with the familiar. And I like introducing, not shocking, but kind of surprising artworks to them that will make them think, that will challenge their thinking, that might make them not uncomfortable, but more challenged and inspired. And another way to do this, like put the familiar artworks in new contexts. I show them how something they know very well, where it really comes from, how it is used in lots of films, in lots of songs, in lots of social media contexts, and so on. And actively include your students and show interest in their own preferences, because that's a number one thing for teachers to do, like acknowledging that maybe our students don't even realize that, but they also love art and they engage with art. Maybe they create art. I'm surprised how many students are actively engaged in creating art in some way. So if you show interest in how they do it and what they like to do, and trust them to illustrate something, to create something, to think of a really interesting design element, like a light installation, then maybe they will feel more engaged, which will make them want to speak about it, describe it. And once we are engaged, we use language to talk about it more carefully and more attentively. And that just leads to better development and more learning. And that's our objective here. So I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and I hope you got inspired. And I hope the first thing you do tomorrow is use a painting or any kind of ideas related to art and try it in your own classrooms. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Nóra. Thank you. What an exciting world this is, and also very inspiring, just even looking at the images. it creates a different vibe. Let's look at some of the, we've got time for questions, and we do have some questions in the Q&A by our participants. Okay. And this, what you see here on the slide, just for the audience, is the series. You can explore it on the QR on our YouTube channel, and also Nóra's presentation will be available there. As the participants are thanking you, I would like to ask, there's one question from one of our participants, is how would you adapt these for lower level learners? I know that you specialize in adult education, and this was the focus. It was about the adult classroom. And if they have low linguistic skills, A1, A2, for example, would you, how would you adapt these ideas to possibly work with these levels?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And there's a lot of potential, I think, in artworks for lower levels. First of all, let's go backwards. Look at the picture books. Picture books have practically or any kind of visually engaging, these really beautiful silent books are great for, as I say always, the number one way of learning a language is labeling the artwork. So you use them for teaching the words first, and then you teach them colors, you teach them movement. So you start building a story, actually. And once you have read, you have created just on a double page, a story, there's so much to talk about. Of course, if they are children, then you can act it out. Kids love repetition. I always did that. I used to teach lower levels, actually. I worked quite a lot with even 5-year-old students. And the only way I could do it was like these beautiful picture books. Then I used to teach, let's go backwards to talk about like the story as a narrative, as paintings. I used to teach grade 7 and like middle school level students, but I realized that the really quiet students needed more inspiration. So I had a projector with a painting in every lesson. And I simply asked them to create simple narratives. First, just words. A picture of a snowy mountain, a beautiful picture. There was a carriage running. Where is the carriage? Where is the cart going? Where is the carriage going? Why is the name of the title of the painting? I don't know. It was Pancake Day. Oh, it's in February. We eat pancakes. And then we start looking behind the story. So it's all about vocabulary building for lower levels and simple narratives. But I think lower level students can also engage with abstract ideas. So you pre-teach some vocabulary to them, saying like, this picture means to me, or this picture makes me feel. And then you enter the world of feelings or abstract ideas that you are engaging with. The other way around, artistic creation, poster design works. I actually got inspired by a Greek researcher and teacher in a primary school who uses poster design to inspire students' artistic creation about either like environmental issues or that's. I know it's not like art, but the design process means a lot of creativity, and you are working together with colors and pictures. So that process is great, again, to
absolutely
with lower levels. So that's just my couple of ideas. But
there's so many ideas, and you are right. This is just wonderfully selected ideas from your experience teaching through the grades, and it's always involving for students. Now, I want us to go back to one of your key practices, and we've talked about it a lot, and I know that you're very passionate about this on-site teaching, about teaching within the museum space. And sometimes this is practically possible. Sometimes it's, you know, there are limitations, barriers to different teaching contexts. So I want to approach this in two ways. So how do you prepare for these visits? So it's so I guess you're doing some kind of pre-teaching in the classroom. Talk to us a little bit about the process before you take them to the museum. And if they cannot physically visit a gallery, do you work with virtual galleries? Could that work? So let's think a little bit about that space.
So there are two things to do. First, the pre-visit experiences, we just talk about the topic, what they expect to see there, what they experience, what their experience is, what they hope to see there. I asked them to check the museum website because that's, again, some reading experience. Usually the museums have English texts, so we read in English. I always have a list of guiding questions for them they can choose from. I say, you don't have to answer every question, like, how is it organized? Did you follow a certain route? What was the first thing you noticed? What's the most interesting art object for you? Choose only one. Look at the theme. What's the theme of the exhibition here? So these are things I help them observe more carefully. And then we always have an on-site discussion starting with the personal. What's your favorite object? Once they talk about that, then we have a lot to explore. And then I ask them to write a review. It couldn't be longer than 1 page, but they write a review or they do some kind of design inspired by the museum. They can also write a narrative inspired by the exhibition or write a review or sometimes prepare a poster if we can't go to the museum. As a linguist, I also talk about, of course, but I'm not going into that now. I will talk about how language works and the difficulty of the language and translation in the museum when we look at labels, for example. Virtual galleries. I turned to Google Art project for the street view, because then we can walk around in the most famous museum. That's number one. I'm sorry to say that, but thanks to the pandemic, all the museums have virtual galleries now.
Exactly.
So that's one positive outcome. So at least we have that, and we can look at specific artworks, or we can visit the Tate or any kind of big museums. They have beautiful online collection. One more thing, museums started doing museum-based narratives where they have beautiful stories on their websites. So it's a full immersion in a way, and we can enter that magical world. So yes.
There's so many resources, exactly.
I know, it's endless, it's beautiful.
Let's look at one final question from one of our participants. A lot of teachers, and I think this is a reality that a lot of them share, they work with mixed level classrooms. So then we're thinking about this notion of differentiation. Yes. When you're working with artworks, how would you cater for this mixed level classroom?
You will think that I'm really trying to convince you, but then I'm a salesman for art. But I really think that art is the way, because it is the resource that will immediately differentiate. Because you engage with it, you're higher level, you're more advanced, you write your story, but then you only collect the words for it, and then you only do a presentation. You need more speaking practice. So you look at the same artwork, you do only speaking practice. You are good at that. You want to write a narrative for it. You want to only describe the person, which is not that difficult a skill, or you only want to collect all the colors, or you want to look at the background story. You want to look at the author's or the painter's storyline. So again, you immediately choose the focus point, and you choose the level of difficulty within the same classroom. So it becomes a resource that is, as somebody is saying, and it's so true, you don't need to be an expert. I'm sorry to say it to art historians. I adore art historians, but they do their version, and then we do, the artwork is out there. So everybody has something to say about it and connect with it. That's why the artists created it, artworks. So let's create with them in multiple ways, critically, emotionally, socially, or just on the level of basic vocabulary description. Why not?
Thank you so much.
Art dictionary like that. So yes.
This is a wonderful point to close on. There's all these ways that we can connect. I want to thank you, Nóra, for this insightful, inspiring webinar. It was so great to have you talk to us about a topic that you feel so passionate about, and you've embedded so much in your practice. Now, in terms of what's going to happen next, on the 10th of December, we have our final fourth part of the series with Anna Hasper talking about empathetic communication, another aspect of the human touch. Now, as always, there will be a certificate of completion of participation for you in your emails. And there's a survey as you exit the webinar. I would really appreciate if you are able to fill this. Next week, it's going to be Focus on Reading with me where we're going to talk about reading activities. Please come back, see us again in one of our future webinars. And I want to thank you for your participation today. Thank you so much, Nóra. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.